When you have something important you want to remember, what do? You might repeat it to yourself over and over again. You might ask a parent or a grown-up to help you remember. You might write it down. There are lots of ways for us to remember things that are important. Our story today is about something Jesus wanted his disciples to remember. I wonder what things we have here to help us tell our story. First, we have the color purple. Remember, purple is a color of royalty. It's an important color. On the night before Jesus was arrested and taken away from his friends, he wanted to celebrate with them the Passover feast. The Passover feast was a time when the Israelite people remembered what God had done for their ancestors in freeing them when they were slaves in Egypt. And so the night of the Passover, God told the Israelite people to take each family to take a lamb and to sacrifice the lamb and to put some blood on the posts and on the lintel of their home. The families could go inside their home and eat the lamb safely, because that night an angel of death passed through the land of Egypt. But when the angel came to homes that had the blood on the door frames and on the lintel, the angel would pass over that home. The angel of death would pass over that home. And so the next morning, the Israelite people got up from their homes and were freed, were no longer slaves, and they left Egypt and moved away. So Jesus and his friends would celebrate that meal every year to remember what God had done. And Jesus wanted to celebrate it again this year. And so Jesus called two of his disciples, and he said to them, "Go and make preparations for us to have a Passover feast together." And his disciples said, "Well, but Master, where are we going to have this feast?" And so Jesus told them to go into the market. And when they saw a man carrying a jug of water, to tell the man, "The teacher wants to eat the Passover meal at your house." And so they did. And when they went to the marketplace and found that man, he was so surprised. But he gave them a space, a large room, for them to have the Passover meal together. And so the disciples set up the meal. And when everything was ready, Jesus came. And so did the rest of the disciples, to celebrate the Passover feast, to remember together what God had done. But there was something else that Jesus wanted his disciples to remember at this meal. And so at one point during the dinner, Jesus took some of the special Passover bread and he gave thanks to God for it. And then he took it and he broke it. And he said something like, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this to remember me." And he shared it with his friends. And later in the meal, Jesus took the special Passover wine and he gave thanks to God for it and he poured it. And he said something like, "This cup is a promise in my blood. It's poured out for you for the forgiveness of sins. Do this to remember me." And he shared it. Jesus said other things that night. He told the disciples how he was about to be arrested and taken away, and about how he would die. He told them they would be very sad, but that their sorrow would turn to joy. And he promised them that when he left, he wouldn't leave them alone, but would send a helper, a Holy Spirit helper, to help them remember. Later that night, Jesus was arrested and taken away. And the next day, he was killed, hung on a cross, and died. And the disciples were very, very sad. But 3 days later, God raised Jesus from the dead. And the disciples remembered that Jesus had said, "Your sorrow will be turned to joy." And so they gathered and they spent more time with Jesus. A little while later, Jesus left them to go live with God in heaven. And he kept his promise and sent the Holy Spirit to help them remember. The disciples remembered that last meal that they had shared with Jesus and how Jesus told them about the bread and the cup. And so the disciples told other people about Jesus and about the bread and the cup. And those people told other people about Jesus and about the bread and the cup. And so now, Christians all over the world, when we gather together, even in a giant fancy church or a small mud hut, we remember Jesus and what Jesus did with the bread and the cup. At Summit Avenue, we call this remembering communion. Some churches might call it the Lord's Supper, or you may even hear it called the Eucharist. Some churches share the bread and the cup by passing it around the church. Some people share it by coming forward and taking some bread and some juice or some wine and having it there or taking it back to your seat. Some places have people come forward and they take a bit of the bread and they dip it in the wine, in the juice, and they eat it that way. But all these ways are good. All these ways are good because they help us remember Jesus. They help us remember what Jesus did. Watch now while I put the materials back so you know where you can get them if you would like to take them out and tell this story. I wonder what you remember best about the story. I wonder what the disciples remembered about Jesus. I wonder what you think of when you have bread and juice at communion. I wonder what part of the story you liked best. And now, my friends, it is time for work time. Only you know what is best for you to do at work time today. So I wonder, how would you like to work today?